trying to hurt yourself?
There's been a few games in the past couple of years that felt like they were 7th gen throwbacks. Specifically, I'm thinking of Space Marine 2 and Romeo is a Dead Man. Coming off this year's Summer Games Fest, it looks like we're getting more along the way with the Gears prequel and the new Fable. By the way, the kids are not ready to get swindled on Fable, with all the promises it made, and will likely fail to deliver. The only thing that showcase was missing was the man himself selling me an acorn seed in Oakshire. Just like a Romeo is a Dead Man, feels like a lost entry in Grasshopper's catalog that resurfaced. PRAGMATA feels like a relic from Capcom's past, back when they were trying to find their footing in the Western market. But, you know, without his stink all over it. Lost Planet, Bionic Commando, Dead Rising, fucking Dark Void? Oh shit, remember Dark Void?
Hold on, I'm gonna restart!
If you haven't noticed, most of these titles are third-person shooters plus gimmick. Be it jetpack, swinging, mecha, these games add an extra ingredient to the TPS recipe to spice it up. But PRAGMATA is not just another gimmick shooter on the shelves. Its sci-fi setting and campaign structure share a lot of parallels with Dead Space, which I find interesting as Dead Space took inspo from Resident Evil 4, and I have to believe that Capcom looked over there and went, yeah, we could do something like that. Not in a rip-off kind of way. I'm of the opinion that these four games are in conversation with each other. Besides that, I also feel like PRAGMATA is a demonstration of how confident Capcom's gotten with their modern house style, and rightly so, because this is the game that's supposed to be the reason for the RE Engine logo. Just don't pay attention to how the logo and the game use different hands. Capcom has an enormous catalog, and they've done the occasional sight gag for past works, but PRAGMATA is where I see them draw from their backlog to develop shorthand when it comes to establishing character dynamics and themes. So having said all that, what is PRAGMATA? PRAGMATA is a 2026 third-person shooter developed and published by Capcom. You play as Hugh Mann, a maintenance engineer called on to perform repairs on Delphi's moon base. After receiving a not-so-warm welcome, Hugh becomes a lone survivor of his squad after the steering wheel from Wall-E puts a fatwa out on every organic lifeform. Hugh wakes up to find a little girl repairing his damaged suit, while an iRobot moves in for the kill. Delphi doesn't play around when it comes to building their bots, because bullets don't seem to bother them. That's when Hugh finds out that the little girl on his back is actually a little robot girl who can hack other robots to expose their soft, tender robot guts that are super vulnerable to bullets. With gun and girl in tow, Hugh makes his way through different sections of the moon base to find a way off one rock and onto another.
Hey,
I am DI-03367, a state-of-the-art pragmatic...
hang on a second. Don't you have a name or something?
I said I am DI-0...
Okay. Look, how about we call you Diana?
Diana?
Yeah. From now on, you can be Diana. How's that fit?
Diana...
PRAGMATA's control scheme is pretty simple once you wrap your head around it. You can move Hugh around with the sticks and aim and fire his guns with the triggers. Your suit has jets that let Hugh jump higher than the average Rockstar character and zip around the battlefield to avoid damage. The face buttons perform standard actions: A to jump, B to heal, Y to interact, and X to scan for objectives and other things once you upgrade it. So far, pretty bog standard stuff for a shooter, but then you gotta incorporate hacking into the mix. While holding down left trigger to aim, the game pulls up an overlay on the right-hand side of the screen that displays a hacking grid for whichever target is in your sights. You move the cursor along the hacking grid with the face buttons. Passing through blue squares will extend the length of time an enemy shell remains open once you pass through the green square to complete the hack. It starts off simple, as the game takes it slow so you can acclimate to the new control scheme, but the grid gains complexity with the introduction of gray squares that block your cursor's path, red squares that disable your hack and resets your progress, and narrow paths that limit your cursor's movement. You can equip hacking nodes that appear on the hacking grid. These serve as power-ups that add additional effects to your hack besides opening up targets. Nodes have a set amount of charges that you can use before they're spent, and you can find more in the field from enemy drops and exploration. This is about what I'd expect from a game that plays like a... I guess you can call this a hack and shooter, but hacking means something different in this context. But PRAGMATA did something different from what I would have expected from this kind of game. Typically in shooters, you'd have multiple slots for guns that you could swap at the press of a button. For example, Dead Space has 4 slots for your guns that you can swap by pressing the corresponding button on the D-pad. PRAGMATA also has weapon swapping on the D-pad, but for the most part, you're relying on your main gun as it replenishes ammo over time. Your left and right slots are broken down into offensive and defensive weapons, respectively. Left-hand weapons are focused on dealing pure damage, and right-hand weapons affect enemy behavior, like trapping them in place or altering their hacking grid. Your bottom slot is reserved for support tools that let you distract the enemy with a decoy or plop down a bubble shield. The big difference between your main and backup guns is that, while your main gun can recharge ammo over time, your backup guns have a limited amount of ammo, so you're not meant to rely on them entirely in a fight, but treat them more as power-ups for Hugh in the same way that the hacking nodes are power-ups for Diana. The campaign structure follows a linear path, with Hugh and Diana making use of the tram system to ferry between the shelter that serves as the game's hub and the various sections of the moon base. It's very similar to Dead Space's campaign, which also utilized the tram system as a conceit that allows Isaac to traverse between different parts of the Ishimura. But because of Dead Space's horror tone, there's this constant forward momentum to the game's pacing that prevents you from returning to sections you've already explored unless the campaign brings you back. And while there is a sense of urgency in PRAGMATA's plot, there's more of a focus in plumbing the depth of the game's levels to find every collectible, read every bit of text, and observe every recorded hologram to get the most out of the story. The other difference between both games is that PRAGMATA breaks down each section into smaller, manageable chunks by providing checkpoints in the form of escape hatches for Hugh and Diana to return to the shelter, to restock and upgrade their kit. There's never a sense of safety in Dead Space, as even the save points are terminals you find on the walls of the ship, with necromorphs lurking just outside the next room. A typical PRAGMATA session starts with Hugh and Diana in the shelter, checking the various terminals to see what upgrades are available. The right-hand terminal focuses on Hugh's and Diana's base stats, broken up between Hugh's suit, his gun, and Diana herself. You can upgrade these stats with upgrade nodes you find while exploring the moon base. The left-hand terminal focuses on backup weapons, hacking nodes, and extra abilities for Hugh and Diana. You can upgrade these stats with Luna Filament, the game's catch-all term for the loot you find from enemy drops, supply crates, or storage chests, and Pure Lunum, the ore that's refined to create Luna Filament. Progression in Dead Space kept it simple, with a shop you can access to spend in-game currency on supplies, new weapons, and upgraded suits. You could find upgrade nodes to improve Isaac's base stats, or to unlock special rooms that provided extra stuff like more loot or schematics, and their rarity created a tension in whether you wanted to save them for long-term goals, improving Isaac's stats, or short-term goals, getting more loot. Back to PRAGMATA, once you've made your choices, you go to the tram to select your loadout. At the start, you can only equip one offensive and defensive backup weapon, but you can get an upgrade later on that lets you hold 2 of each type. This is also where you choose which hacking node to bring with you, with a max of 3 after upgrading your slots. You can add mods to your suit. These are passive skills that provide various effects for offensive, defensive, or support purposes. You'll typically find mods in blue chests. The last choice you can make before heading out is selecting a hacking mode. These are effectively styles of hacking. Instead of only having open squares on the grid, you can opt for different types of blue squares that inflict different effects on the enemy. I recommend taking time to thoroughly read about what each mode does, because some of them can interfere with your shooting if you're not paying attention to what mode you've chosen.
What in the...
It almost had us.
Yeah, nice moves, kid.
Each enemy has their own hacking grid layout, with some having additional layouts for certain conditions, like breaking out of a grab before taking the full brunt of damage. Enemies have 2 separate bars over their heads, their health bar and their heat bar. Health is pretty straightforward. Wear it down to kill them. Heat is essentially the Sekiro stance meter. Build it up to stagger an enemy and perform a critical shot. Heat provides an alternative for tankier enemies, and one of the hacking modes is focused on building up heat. Diana has her own meter, separate from Hugh. As you hack, you build it up. When it's full, press in both sticks to perform an overdrive. Overdrive freezes enemies in place, deals enough damage to outright kill weaker enemies, and simplifies the hacking grids of enemies caught in its wake. It's basically your nuke if you find yourself overwhelmed. At some point, you can unlock the ability to auto-hack. If you have some meter, you can press in right stick to automate the hacking process. It's good for enemies with complicated grid paths, but not something you should use as a crutch, as later enemies will have hazards in their grids that prevents an auto-hack. The backup guns have plenty of utility. The first thing you get is a shotgun, and I made sure to max that out first because of the pure burst damage it puts out at point-blank range. There's also a charge gun that penetrates targets, and as you would expect, you can hold down right trigger to increase its damage output. You want this for faraway targets that the shotgun can't reach. There's also a laser that provides damage over time, but it doesn't really pack a punch until you pump some levels into it. The missile pods are great for their lock-on capabilities, especially for airborne enemies. For defensive guns, you start with a stasis net that's spiritually the stasis ability in Dead Space, but with a grenade preview arc. It's great for the early game and most of normal, but I find it inconsistent on harder difficulties. The stun bombs always stayed in my kit, as they knocked basic enemies flat in their asses and built up heat after a few upgrades. I never got much use for the sticky bombs, as they're supposed to simplify a target's hacking grid while they're active, but I'll admit I never put much time into them. Some weapons are locked away until you either clear the campaign or participate in a bingo minigame at the shelter. PRAGMATA shares a distinct honor alongside Max Payne of having the coolest weapon in the game called a jackhammer that clearly doesn't look like a jackhammer. This thing hits like a tank, and there's a follow-up attack you can either land or break out of with your dodge. There's also a weapon that's a counterpart to the sticky bombs, but instead of shrinking the hacking grid, it temporarily wipes out all the hazards and adds additional blue squares. Then there are hacking mines that lay down traps that require you to hack them before they become active, but I don't like two-step weapons, so I didn't really try them out.
That's the Earth. The blue part there is all ocean. Look outside and you can see it from here. That's weird. Only got half of it here. Ah, okay. The printer's busted. But the data here looks all right.
The ocean. Water everywhere.
Kind of hard to appreciate when it's just the half. Listen, we get back to the shelter, I'll whip you up a new one.
Really? I want to see!
Besides the various types of loot you can find, there are also REMs, or holograms of various items from Earth that you can give to Diana as a gift. Giving her REMs rewards you with tokens you can use to unlock data, extra skins, and upgrades in the bingo minigame. Drawing parallels to Dead Rising 2, think of those times you could give Katie a gift. Actually, now that I think about it, PRAGMATA adopts Dead Rising's rhythm of exploring a hostile space to clear objectives and returning to a hub for respite. It also takes Dead Rising's and Dragon's Dogma style of platforming, in that he will pull himself up onto a ledge if it's climbable and his upper body clears it. The enemy roster is fairly diverse, with each type getting 2 to 3 variants. You'll fight iRobots, Tektites, Gonk Droids, the average Twitter poster, and those ciphers from Metal Gear Solid 2. Some enemies will generate shields that block Diana's hacking progress, so you'll have to break those shields with Hugh's guns first before you can crack them open. Bosses somewhat obey the rules of the game. Initially, I thought the defensive gun effects on bosses varied based on difficulty, but after replaying those fights several times, I'm starting to think that it depends on which gun you use on which boss. Some bosses stop in place when they're in a stasis net, and some bosses get rocked if you hit them with stun bombs. And on higher difficulties, it feels like the window for having their shells open is ridiculously short. In terms of aesthetics, PRAGMATA isn't going for the rusted, grungy decay that pervaded in Dead Space. It's more like the endgame sections of the remakes that take place in the Umbrella Nest Labs. Stark, white, and clinical, but clear signs of disrepair.
For your safety, stand clear until the doors are fully open. For your safety, stand clear until the doors are fully open. For your safety, stand clear until the doors are fully open. Welcome to Nest. Enjoy your visit.
The sterile white look of the base reminds me of other Japanese developed games that were chasing that Gears money and also featured hostile robots. Obviously Vanquish, with a protag clad in white armor with jump jets. There's even an upgrade that triggers temporary bullet time if you time a perfect dodge. Pair this with a mod that procs auto hack if you aim just after a perfect dodge, and it sounds like the game's answer to Witch Time. But in practice, it feels more like a variation of Jill's dodge and counter ability in RE3 make. I'd seen people compare PRAGMATA to The Surge, but I really only see that in the inclusion of lift handles. I actually see some binary domain in terms of the scale of some bosses, and how they require specific steps to defeat them. Also, Hugh's face reminds me of Dan from BD in how it looks like a Japanese stereotype of an American, but Hugh's way less chuddy than Dan.
See? Waste the money.
What I really like about PRAGMATA's visuals is how far Capcom's gotten with creating believable cityscapes in terms of detail and scale. You can see where they started with RE2 and 3 make, and even in the early missions of Devil May Cry 5. But there are entire sections in PRAGMATA that almost resemble a futuristic facsimile of Times Square. And the clever thing is, the game's premise justifies a dynamic between artifice and verisimilitude. Hugh even calls it out a few times in some of the random in-game chatter.
Hold on to your hiney.
My what?
Like something out of an amusement park here.
Where?
I'll tell you later.
I think this is a good point to warn you that the rest of the video is going to have spoilers, so if you're still on the fence on playing PRAGMATA, I recommend it if you've been enjoying Capcom's recent output. If you've got resi fatigue or don't vibe with the hyper-real art style of the RE engine, I'd say hold off on it. You could jump to this timestamp for my final thoughts on PRAGMATA.
Can you hear me? Please respond.
The heck?
Early on in the campaign, Hugh and Diana find a talking cat hologram and follow its advice until they meet the person controlling it. Unfortunately, she happens to be tied up and can't be of any help until she's freed. This requires some light gardening and facing off against Weeaboo robots. Weeabots? This is also where I was pleasantly surprised by the spiritual successor of the Novicidors from RE4, and not the camo cells from the remake, but the true invisible cunts.
Man, that's fast.
The latter half of the campaign introduces airlocks to lead to the moon's exterior, and this is PRAGMATA's answer to Dead Space's vacuum sections. But where Dead Space emphasized the horror of going through a soundless environment full of enemies with a movement handicap, PRAGMATA exaggerates Hugh's jump height and adds inertia to his leaps when he's moonwalking. Don't get it twisted though. These sections are still dangerous because of the inclusion of one specific level hazard.
Warning. Unauthorized presence detected in the mining zone. Luna Digger. Halt mining protocol and remove these intruders.
Hugh? Something's coming!
What the? Look at the size of that worm!
I'm glad Capcom found a way to bring back the sandworm from Lost Planet. After you reboot the Moonbase's AI software, you find out that Diana's doppelganger doesn't have her best interest in mind. 8 is a character I was referring to at the start of the video when I said that PRAGMATA is using Capcom's library to create shorthand for character traits. I think it's quite obvious which Capcom characters 8 took notes from, with the way she manipulates Dead Luna filament.
This won't be nearly enough. I'll need more. Much more.
I need more power.
shipment for Earth is almost ready. I have nearly fulfilled my purpose. Purpose we were meant to share.
And we're supposed to be twins.
I appreciate Capcom's restraint in not putting 8 in a red jacket to contrast with Diana, as the white jacket she's wearing is meant to resemble a straitjacket and clue what's in on her personality. Diana doesn't take the news well, and Hugh has to carry her back to the shelter. This sequence reminded me of that part in RE2 make where Claire has to carry Sherry to the tram that leads to Umbrella's Nest Labs. Some enemy types now have a variant that's infected with dead filament. Their hacking grids will be full of hazards that can momentarily stun your hack. To avoid this, you'll have to use Diana's newly acquired skill to cleanse infected machines. Her overdrive protocol also changes into a deletion protocol that purges any dead filament on surrounding enemies along with additional effects from overdrive. Stronger units have cores you have to destroy to prevent dead filament regeneration. Diana wasn't the only one who caught astray when 8 goes rampant. I like how the last third of the game has Hugh doing his best to keep Diana in the dark with his condition, to the point where he keeps his visor on at all times as opposed to opening it in the early sections when he thought they were in relative safety. It's a great visual metaphor of shutting himself off emotionally so he can be the logical one in the partnership to temper Diana's emotional responses.
This black stuff is all that's left.
Did the dead filament eat them?
Hey, Diana? Think you can cleanse infected humans?
No. Once their cells get eaten away, they're gone for good.
I see. So there's nothing you can do.
I'd seen takes saying that Pragmata was secretly a Mega Man, and I totally get that feeling after finding out the true purpose of the Pragmata. For the most part, the OST is good at complementing the game's mood. It balances the soft piano keys that symbolize Diana's innocence with the pumping synths that thrum during combat sections, but it's all very low-key. Where it stood out to me the most is during the trip to restore Diana, as the music has intentional breaks to resemble a CD skipping to mirror the damage that's been inflicted onto Diana, and it stays like that until Diana's fully repaired. I said in my Romeo video that I found it disappointing that every boss fight became a big monster instead of the targets shown in mission briefings. Pragmata does that fake out as well, but I don't mind it here because 8's final form looks visually consistent with the rest of the boss designs. Actually, it looks like we're fighting a Warframe. And to be honest, the optics of killing a child, synthetic or otherwise, just don't look good. The final stretch is where Pragmata really shows a Resident Evil inspo, as there's a final boss fight, and it takes place, oh boy, I get to steal another Civi bit, in space! I had to go through this humiliation ritual again, just to get the comparative footage, but this final set piece fight visually reminded me of Lost Planet's final fight, minus all the bullshit. It's actually very on rails, and all the risk of colliding with the moon-based greebling is largely for show. I could see criticism for this part of the game being a glorified QTE section, but Pragmata is no longer testing you. This is just one less cathartic release before the story winds down. Swear to God, if Capcom has the stones to put out another versus Capcom game, this jetpack rig needs to be Hugh's level 3 super.
No! Not like this!
Let me try.
Here we go!
I like that Hugh only flips his visor up at the end, because he knows that he can't hide the truth from Diana anymore. Only one of them is getting off that rock. I'm a big fan of how Capcom uses symbolism and irony to elevate the mundane sci-fi elements of the technology. Like, Diana tells Hugh that she was locked away in a container and forgotten until the events of the game began, which pays off when the last remaining shuttle that can return to Earth is only meant for cargo, not humans. Or how the only way to provide enough power to the shuttle to return to Earth is to replace its dead battery with the one on Hugh's suit. And where is the battery located? Yep. As nice as the emotional bits are, I feel like the game's writing doesn't really land a direct hit on its theme regarding AI and automation. 8 is the antagonist because she's carrying out what she believes to be the final wish of the scientist who created the Pragmata, which is
Global chain reaction.
Complete global saturation.
from the perspective of a Westoid, I found that Hugh accepted Diana a little too easily so that the plot could move along. At the start, he makes really careless remarks about his thoughts on robots and AI in front of the droid that would attack him later in the intro, which ironically validates his concerns. But he's never suspicious of Diana's intentions, nor 8's until she betrays them, and that's odd coming from a guy who said this right at the start. You could make the argument that Diana, looking like a lost little girl, was an easy manipulation tactic. A hack, if you will, on Hugh's sensibilities. But his interactions with his team imply that he's never been good with kids or sympathetic towards them. Granted, it does lead to a great scene where Hugh explains his motivation for protecting Diana.
Look, Diana, I was a lot like you. A thirst for life and all its mysteries. And boy, I had a few bumps along the way. But I had someone looking out for me. And now it's your turn. A whole new life. If you're ready.
Okay, then let's go. Together.
I think my sticking point is that Hugh never explicitly says he buys into the premise that Diana is a child, and not just a simulacrum of a child. I think there's some kind of message in having an AI manipulate another AI causing major disaster, as the game's plot twist centers on 8 being the one responsible for turning the moon-based AI against humans, but the only reason she was captured by the AI was due to the moonquake damaging it, which was not part of her plan at all. Is Pragmata's writing revolutionary? No, this ain't Shakespeare, but I just saw the biggest industry plan pull top scores on major publications despite being, and I'm going to paraphrase another channel's description of it, a glorified ADHD STEM toy that also happens to be Suburban Ennui game number 842. So I'm willing to be more than charitable to Pragmata for showing basic competency in visual storytelling.
Yeah, baby. We did it. This is how we say good job.
I'd seen stuff from Capcom saying that the art team took great pains to make the environments resemble corrupted generative AI art, with repetitive assets overlapping on top of each other, to give the effect that no human oversight results in, not body horror, but techno horror environments. But I didn't pick up on that at all. To me, it just looks like what happens if you suck at 3D printing. However, I do think that there is something in Pragmata's gameplay that accidentally does a great job criticizing AI and automation in its mechanics. Remember I mentioned that suit mod that instantly procs autohack after a successful perfect dodge? It's great for most of the campaign, until you reach the final third. See, autohack works for most of the enemy roster because it's programmed to search for the shortest clear path between the start and end points. Note how I said clear, because if you try to autohack a corrupted enemy, the hack won't complete because there are hazards in the way. The final boss's hacking grid has a unique gimmick where a hurt floor takes effect on most of the grid, spaced out between intervals. If you proc an autohack from a perfect dodge, the hack will go mostly through, but then shut down once the hurt floor activates, and there's never enough time for the hack to reach the endpoint. And since you can't change suit mods outside of the shelter, you've just made the fight harder for yourself because this means you can't immediately start hacking once you've pulled off a perfect dodge. So in a way, you've screwed yourself over for relying on automation. I don't think this was intentional, because if it was, auto-hacking would be an innate skill that you would always have, so that everyone who played the game would have the same experience. After beating the campaign, you unlock hard difficulty, Lunatic. Get it? Cause we're on the moon. Just like how Hugh names her Diana because that's the Roman name for Artemis, who's associated with the moon the way Apollo was associated with this. Never mind. You also unlock a bonus mode called Unknown Signal. It's not a continuation of the game, but an extra set of simulations apart from the ones you could do in the base game. No time limit or bonus objective to distract you, just make it to the end. Your reward is an extra suit for Hugh and Diana, plus a super secret mod that slightly changes the game's ending. I recommend clearing out every area before attempting this mode, as some of the sim pods are locked away until you've completely scoured the respective sections. You also get to revisit bosses you've already fought, but now they're stronger versions with new attack patterns. I like that they all get the orange color scheme to match with the other upgraded enemy types from the campaign. I want to put this out there before I bring the non-spoilered watchers back, but I forgot to mention that the original premise of PRAGMATA was a Death Stranding imitator, but more for the aesthetics and the gameplay, if you go back to initial teasers. I say this now because I thought it was cute that the post-credit stinger kinda made a callback to that origin with the footprints on the sand. Side note, if you put Diana in an outfit with shoes, the footprints will change as well. Like, oh that's neat. If you cleared Unknown Signal, then this final shot in the game also ends up being a Mega Man reference, just not the one I was expecting.
Look, Dad, I got a new power in Mega Man.
I'm pleasantly surprised with PRAGMATA. It's not perfect by any means. Like I said before, boss interactions with weapon effects are inconsistent and only get worse in higher difficulties. Item management's a bit clunky, especially when you're swapping out hacking power-ups. You can choose up to 3 before leaving the shelter, but you can only assign 1 of each type to a slot, but picking up power-ups in the field lets you swap them around, so you can have doubles and maybe even triples of the same power-up. Had flashbacks of swapping out weapons and Vanquish to optimize upgrades. Cleansing corrupted bots can be annoying, as you have to hold down the button to charge it up, but if you dodge or get hit, the charge resets. Using a heal charge means you have to be on foot and not doing anything else until it takes effect. Supply crates can drop health pickups, but the probability is pretty low. I wouldn't mind a mod that provided health pickup drops from landing critical shots. You get an alternate weapon to swap out the starting pistol. I'm not calling it an upgrade, as I swap back to the pistol after giving the PDW a fair shake. Sure, it has more ammo and builds up heat faster, but each bullet does way less damage, and waiting for the ammo to fully refill takes much longer than the pistol because it cycles through each bullet instead of refilling the entire mag in bulk. To me, it's just not that viable until you get the mod in Unknown Signal that completely refills your ammo after a successful hack. Oh, and then there's Diana's combat chatter.
Jump to... Something's aiming at us. It's like they're pulling up.
I personally don't mind Diana's Boy of Warisms, as a hack and shooting gameplay does induce tunnel vision for me, so having an audio cue for an incoming attack is handy. And Capcom does not want you to turn that off, as there's nothing in the options to shut her up. But besides these issues, and for how short the campaign felt after the fact, I enjoyed playing PRAGMATA. I've been trying to figure out how to sum up the experience, and I realized that PRAGMATA, at its core, is like playing a Resident Evil remake without the baggage of being a Resident Evil remake. Similar camera perspectives, similar shooting controls, similar enemy movement and interactions, but better, faster, smoother. If you've ever played those games I mentioned earlier from Capcom's Sonic 06 era, you'll know what I mean when I say that some other games at the time really wanted you to feel like you were an average Joe in an extraordinary situation, and they did so by having your guys stumble around whenever they got hit by something big and stompy. PRAGMATA has cutscenes that harken back to that era, but I love that they never make you go through that bullshit in the actual fights. Every time a remake drops, you have to go through the same discourse cycle of whether it holds up compared to the original, whether it's even worth being made, and whether its existence supplants the original altogether. We don't gotta deal with none of that with PRAGMATA. RE3R gets a bad rep because it feels anemic compared to 2 and 4, with an entire section cut, and a dearth of alternate outfits. Wow, I actually found a way to use dearth in a sentence. PRAGMATA's campaign has a similar link to RE3R, but because there's no other version of the game to compare against, it doesn't have to face that kind of scrutiny. In fact, it feels like Capcom is trying to get everything out in one go, as Unknown Signal has all the trappings of a 1-year free update to extend player retention, but it's part of the base game. And while there are a few too many dupes for my liking, Hugh and Diana definitely have a larger wardrobe than Jill and Carlos, and that's without buying the deluxe edition. There's a long-running criticism of Capcom I've joined in on that, despite their vast catalog of IPs, they only cater to 3 or 4 of them most of the time. This might be cope on my part, but if putting those games out is what gives them the money to throw in the occasional Kunitsugami, or Onimusha, or PRAGMATA, then I guess it's a necessary evil. I don't know if I want a direct continuation of PRAGMATA's plot, but the fact that a potential sequel is even on the table is enticing. Play PRAGMATA.